as a counselor, many times in the counseling room, we deal with couples' expectations. One either has an expectation that the other doesn't agree with. Maybe there's expectations that are unspoken, and so that person doesn't meet those. So talking about expectations before you go into marriage would be really important. So one of the questions is, have you communicated your expectations? So what are expectations in a marriage?
Oh, everybody has them. Everybody brings expectations into relationships. We're unaware of them oftentimes. And then when we find out that our expectations aren't being met, sometimes we feel selfish for having them, so we don't talk about them. But just like bad financial habits and attitudes, they will eventually be discovered even if you tried to keep them a secret. Same thing applies with expectations. We cannot get away from having them because of how we're raised. Here's an example, Kim. I was raised in a pretty traditional Southern home in South Carolina. My mom cooked every meal. My dad worked, and my mom worked a little bit outside the home, part-time, but mostly she took care of the kids, she took care of the meals, she took care of the house, the laundry, the bathrooms, the vacuuming, everything. I grew up watching my dad finish a meal, and he would thank my mom, but he would not even as much as put his plate in the sink. My mom waited on him hand and foot. I thought that's how every family did it. I didn't know any better. So my expectations when I left home and moved away to go to college were that one day I'd marry a woman and she would cook every meal and she would fix my plate for me. And I know that the women watching this right now are cringing. They're throwing something at the computer screen. But I didn't even realize I had that expectation until I married a woman who came from Atlanta, different culture, different background, and immediately it became apparent to me my expectations are going to have to change. But the funny thing was, I did not even know I had those. So my advice, and in the book and even right now, is that you go through the chapter and ask yourself a list of questions that we've provided for you. What are my expectations in marriage? And here are a few big ones. How many children do I want? Where do I want to live? What region of the country would I like to live in? How close do I want to live to my parents? This is a big one. This causes a lot of friction in marriages, especially when kids are being born and you get to that season. What kind of job do I want to work? Do I want to work at all? For instance, if the husband wants to marry a wife and his expectation is she'll stay home and raise the kids, then he needs to ask her, do you have an expectation of being a career woman? Because I have an expectation of you staying home with the kids. Now, the two of you have to work that out. I'm not saying that one way is better than the other for the two of you, but you need to talk about that expectation. Where will you take vacations? The mountains, the beach? Do you like to travel? Are you a homebody? Here's a big one, and I'm not trying to be crass, but I think there are lots of unrealistic and unspoken sexual expectations about marriage, especially in a culture and a time when pornography is so accessible. I think that there are a lot of people who, guys tend to have more of an expectation of, I'm going to have a lot of sex, I'm going to have it as often as I want to, my wife is going to be turned on just by looking at me, and it doesn't take long in marriage for most men to realize that's not how sex works. And if abuse has been a part of a person's history, then they're going to have certain expectations about sexuality, about where sex will happen, when sex will happen, intimacy, things that have to lead up to it. These are all very, very important, because if we don't talk about our expectations, we'll eventually get into the marriage. And when our expectations are not being met, we get upset. We get angry, we get frustrated, we begin to resent our spouse, and we don't know why we resent them. And this is what marriage counselors like you do for people. You dig down, you try to turn those rocks over and say, why are you so upset? Why are you so mad? Why are you so angry at one another? And unfortunately, a lot of times it takes 2, 3, maybe 10 counseling sessions for the person to realize, I smuggled these expectations into the marriage that I didn't even know I had. So it's good to get out a piece of paper and a pen, talk about these things. And that's why we wrote this chapter. It gives you and your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your husband or your wife an easy way to sit down together with the book in your hands and say, let's talk about the things that we want to accomplish out of marriage. One more thought. It's not wrong to have expectations. It's actually a good thing. You just got to make sure you know what they are.
And communicate those.
You have to talk about
To
them with
each
each
other.
other.